expect that if you're going through a divorce, there's going to be anxiety, which is a nameless kind of fear. See, anxiety is different than fear. Fear has an object. Fear is a car is coming and I see the car and I jump aside. Anxiety is you're in the middle of the highway and there are cars coming from every direction. So anxiety feels worse than fear. It's sort of this low grade, I don't know, and the future, and who would want to go out with me. And see, almost always when couples have come to the point of divorce, their sexual life has become fairly dysfunctional. Or what we're seeing a lot of is that anybody from a dysfunctional family who marries another person very, very soon, within a few years, their sexual life will become more and more dysfunctional. And then you have the issue of a woman wondering if she's desirable. Her husband doesn't seem to want her. Whereas men often don't have that quite to the same degree, at least in my experience of counseling people. But it's often a question of a fear of who would want me. So later on I'm going to talk about a danger. And one of the dangers is becoming quite promiscuous when you're going through a divorce. And we'll see a lot of people do that. It's not uncommon. But there's a danger around it that a person really needs to pay attention to. But anyway, this idea of the emotions, feeling these emotions intensely, they're going to be there, and we really need to understand that. And let yourself have the fear. See, fear is wisdom and discernment. As you experience the fear, it imprints in your body. And it'll help you to look at your own issues around abandonment. May help you to go do some original pain grief work, where you deal with some of your childhood, inner child issues, your original pain, family dysfunction issues. I've had a lot of people going through divorce. I say, look, you feel horrible already. Let's just feel a little more horrible and do some of this original pain grief work. Let's grieve the loss of your mother and your father. Would you be willing to do that? Come on, do the inner child workshop that we do. And a lot of people do that, and they use this time to stay in the pain, but to really get something out of the pain. See, I wouldn't recommend that people stay in pain just for the hell of it. I mean, that's not a useful thing. But no pain, no gain. Pain is a healer and a teacher. That when you see, when that stuff is imprinted, it's like when we're working with the spouse of an addict who's in their head all the time, obsessing on the addict. So what? They don't get to feel their feelings. When we can get that person to really feel how alone he is, how sad he is, how abandoned he feels, because his wife's on pills all the time, then he'll move. It'll move him to action. See, because what your emotions do is move you. Emotions move you. You're moved to tears. You're moved to take action with anger. You're moved to run away with fear. And you see, when you disrupt a relationship that started so well, it's wise to have some discernment and fear about it. It's wise to be fearful about going out and getting in another relationship if you don't know what happened to you. If you really don't know what the issues are, and I don't mean just the conscious issues, that he wouldn't give you any money or she wouldn't give you enough sex. Those may be the conscious issues, but there's always unconscious issues that go back into that family of origin stuff, that it's two people, two half people clinging to each other, demanding that the other one make them whole. So as you go through this pain, it's a time to get to work on this stuff. And so that emotional voltage can be one of the most important things. The next I, the I is initiate action. And you may not feel like it a lot of times, to initiate action. See, it's the worst thing you can do is to stay isolated and alone. So when I talk to people, I say, go find a support group for people who are going through a divorce. Talk to people that have been through a divorce. They're 2 years out of it. Because it probably takes a year and a half to go through all the stuff that I'm talking about. Now, I don't mean that literally. You know, if you're real codependent, you're going to take that down. I don't want you to take that literally. But I want to communicate the idea that it takes a long time. It takes a long time. You don't grieve. Lindemann, for example, in his work found that 9 months was a crucial time in grieving the death of a person. We see the funerals all over and you're back to work for a long time. They're not bringing any food over to the house 9 months later. He found that to be a crucial time in grief. It's sometimes the time when the loss impacts you the most powerful, where you really get it, what's happened. So it's real important that you realize that you're going to need support. You're probably going to need support now more than in any other time of your life. When a person is grieving, they go back into that child state. Somebody said when you're grieving, it's a time for healthy dependency. You need to be loved and nurtured more during this time than any other time since you were 5 years old. And you really need to be healthily dependent. What I mean by that is let somebody help you. You know, like I try to give people some guidelines for that. If somebody's grieving, one of the things you can't do very well when you're grieving and when you're depressed is think. You can't think. So like if I'm going to help you, I'll come up and say, look, I'd like to help you. I can go to the airport or I can go to the store and pick up the groceries. I can pick up your kids and bring them home and stay with them for 45 minutes. Or I can go pick up the mail for you at the post office. Which would you like me to do? So what I do then is I get you thinking and give you some choices. So when you're helping somebody, see, a lot of times when people are grieving, the help they get is this. They get a phone call and say, gee, I was sure sorry to hear that you and your husband are divorcing. If there's anything I can do, call me, and they never call back. And you know, we do that with death. We say, oh, I'm so sorry to hear. If there's anything you need, call me. Well, the one thing people who are grieving can't do is think. At that moment, they don't know what they need. So it's often very useful if someone can give you some choices. But initiating action means find somebody you can talk to. You've got to come out of hiding. And there's good support groups for people going through divorce. Now again, a lot of people get in their shame and they say, well, I'm not going to be seen dead there. Everybody will know I'm divorcing. Well, you are, you know. What's the big deal? And then being able to talk about it and to talk about these feelings. You see, grief demands, here's an interesting thing about grief. You cannot grieve alone. That's what I believe. And lots of us who are in the field clinically believe that you really can't grieve alone. That's why a lot of us couldn't resolve our childhood stuff. We cried in our pillows every night or twice a week. So wasn't that grieving? No, because there was no support there for you. Grief is the only thing that will heal naturally if you have support. You need to have somebody there who won't shame you, who will legitimize your pain, say that's horrible what you're going through, and be there for you. So the initiate action means finding a network and talking about it. And then the N, I'm going to put it up here, is nurturing. Nurturing yourself. You need to nurture yourself and let other people nurture you. It's important that you allow other people to nurture you, but you become, I give you permission to become very selfish during this period. You need to take care of you. You need to take care of that little child in you who fears the terrors of aloneness. See, a lot of marriages that I've seen as a therapist stay together out of the terrors of aloneness. It's like they don't want to go it alone. Both of them are into these deep abandonment fears. And when people finally have the courage to say, we've been doing this for 18 years, we're both selling ourselves short, we've tried, we've been to 6 marriage counselors, and we're neither one of us growing. See, if love is healthy, growth comes out of it. Remember Scott Peck's wonderful definition? To love is the will to extend yourself for the sake of nurturing your own and another's spiritual growth. So if there's love there, you're going to be growing. Well, here are two people beating each other into the ground. Here are two people that are no longer growing. And they've come to the point of having the courage to acknowledge that and the willingness to go it alone. See, that's real scary. And you need support. You need to be nurtured. Now again, I'm not encouraging people to divorce, but if you're in the process, it takes courage to do it. And any of you who have been through it know how impractical it is. It messes up everything. All the ways, the habituated ways of life get messed up. It's terribly painful for men to have to leave their homes and their children. And I'm not saying it's worse for men than women, but it is not easy for men. It's not easy for either one, because a whole habituated way of life is crashed. So this idea of getting nurturing your own inner child, go out and feed yourself nutritious ice cream. What am I saying? We go, take yourself to the beach. Take yourself to buy yourself something. Nurture the little part of you that feels scared and lonely. Let others nurture you. Let your friends nurture you. Call your friends and tell them that you need them. Get 4 or 5 in case one can't help that day. So it's a real important thing. And then the last thing, the G, and boy, this is messy, is God as you understand God, or some spiritual source, I think is crucial going through this process. To realize that you have something deep within you, a place that you're never alone. Whatever you choose to call that. Higher consciousness, higher self, soul, the divine image, your own personal relationship with God as a person, or your own relationship with the sources of energy in the universe. That what Carl Rogers said, the facts are friendly. The universe is friendly. Einstein on his deathbed said there's only one important question: is the universe friendly? Now I think that most people who really are living their life believe that the universe is friendly, and that there is a place deep within us where we have an immense resource. And I choose to call that God, and many people choose to call that God. If that doesn't fit for you, a spiritual source means there's something greater than myself. When people are in their healthy shame, knowing their healthy limitations, you can't not believe that there's something greater than yourself. If it's a tree or electricity or the age of the cosmos, whatever it is, when a person really has accepted their limits. And that's what healthy shame is, to know your limits. Nietzsche, the man who pronounced the death of God, said that shame safeguards the spirit. So what I'm really talking about here is spirituality. A source, and what I mean by spirituality, the belief that there's something more than my limited ego consciousness. Spirituality is what Oscar Wilde said when he said, this is the true meaning of life, to live for something recognized by yourself, to be a mighty cause, to be a force of nature rather than a feverish little clod of grievances and ailments, complaining that the universe is not devoting itself to making you happy. Life is its own splendid justification. I want to be used up when I die. The harder I work, the more I live. I don't believe that life's a flickering candle. I believe it's a splendid torch. And I want to make it burn as brightly as I can before I hand it on to my children. It's a wonderful statement of Oscar Wilde. And that's what I think spirituality is. Generativity. A kind of an evolutionary sense, to give something back to life. But to also believe, what every infant has to learn is that you can trust the world. You can't trust everything in it. It's imperfect, it's human. But that basically there is a source of solace. It has never ceased to amaze me how we can always find a grace somewhere. You're not finding it, doesn't seem like it. But surviving divorce then it involves all of these things. It involves going through this grief process and being willing to have the courage to face it, to stay with it. I have at times, for example, said to very powerful men who were what we would now call first-level sex addict men, who had very powerful mother issues and therefore had to control women. And then their wife one day leaves them, and they just become sniveling little boys because they're still Oedipally bonded. They never broke the bonds with mother. And I'll say to those guys, you need to stay alone from 90 days to 6 months. Have no relationship. Have no relationship with a woman. And they look at me like I'm insane. And stay in your pain, and stay in your loneliness, and stay in your separateness. Because the only way out is through. Now, it's a kind of, this is legitimate suffering, and this is what we don't want to do. And what I'm going to talk about in a little later on is some of the grave kinds of damaging things that happen to people during this process. And everything I will say when I talk about the danger of divorcing will be bound up with people refusing to do the grief work. Refusing to stay in the emotion, stay in the pain, stay in contact with what's happening inside of you. Dealing with the anger, the depression, dealing with the fear, the anxiety. Being willing to reach out and ask for help. See, shame-based people often don't believe they have the right to depend on anybody. And here's an opportunity to really let somebody love you. Here's an opportunity to test it out, and especially those of you that are caretakers, where you just be powerless and let some of your friends, let some of us love you, and risk doing that. Because when you get on the other side of that, there is a great healing that comes through it. And when you get on the other side of that pain, there is a great healing that comes from it. Because you know that you've been through it. You've been through it. And it's like it can't really ever happen to you again in the same way because you've been through it. You've been through the pain. You've dealt with it. So that's what I want you to think about in terms of surviving divorce. Now, in just a moment, after a while, I'm going to talk about the dangers, the grave dangers, and we'll spend some time looking at several areas of danger in the divorcing process. I want to take some time with you now, take the word danger and talk about certain areas that I think have real grave danger in them. And I've seen this happen. I'm going to give you some examples. I usually make composite cases and usually have people's permission to talk about the thing, always have their permission to talk about it if I'm using someone specifically. But these will not be actual specific people, they'll be composites. But anyway, in every aspect that I'm going to describe here about the dangers of things that can happen through this process, really ways that you're not going to really survive divorcing, it's the failure to do the grief work. And the first thing that I talk about is, for lack of a better word, detailing. A person becomes obsessed with detailing the whereabouts of their spouse. I had a man that came to me with 30 notebooks, 35-part notebooks filled with daily diary entries of what his wife, estranged wife, was doing. I mean, things like, and she said hello, were on here. So this is about becoming obsessive. It's about becoming obsessive about your soon-to-be ex-spouse. And it's real easy to happen when you're in pain. Because you see, obsession is a form of mental addiction. If I get up in my head and obsess all the time, then I don't have to feel the feelings. I can stay in my head. And you can learn to sleuth around. And I've had clients who sat outside of the apartment half the night, who followed them all over town, who gathered data, spent their whole, just spent every waking moment obsessing on their spouse. See, this isn't divorcing. Divorcing means cutting, means letting go, means goodbye, I'm leaving, we're separating. And so detailing, documenting, scorekeeping, sleuthing, those kind of behaviors are terribly damaging. I had to go to court in this particular case, and the lawyer just tore this guy to ribbons. And I remember him asking me, have you ever seen anyone? And he had all the notebooks. I don't know where he got them. Do you think this is normal behavior? And, I had to say, well, I haven't seen it in anyone else, but, who knows? I was trying to, say something good for the poor guy. He was obsessed, so obsessed with her. He was possessed by her. And I've seen women possessed. I've got a poem at home that a woman wrote me, and it's the sickest thing I've ever seen, about this love between she and Rothgar, her soon-to-be ex-husband. And this guy absolutely didn't give her the time of day. I mean, the thing was a total illusion. It was a fantasy. And so this kind of detailing is a very, very dangerous thing. We've got to let go. And that's the hardest thing sometimes. And if you'll stay in the pain, that's the way to let go. Because you see, part of the problem with emotion is that when you're in emotion, it feels out of control. And many of us have been taught, in fact, our whole culture has been dominated by rationalism. Man is a rational animal, so stay in your head. As an author, I hate to do this, but I often tell groups of codependents, quit reading. Salvation by reading. It doesn't come by reading. You've got to do something about it. And the joke about the codependents, they're standing there, there's a sign that says heaven, and there's another sign over here and it says lecture on heaven, and all the codependents are over here for the lecture. So we're going to figure this out before we go there. Trying to figure your ex-spouse out is a losing proposition. Now, any kid from a dysfunctional family gets set up to do this. Jane Milton Moss describes a scenario of a little girl coming home from school. Her mother's an alcoholic, and Mama hadn't started drinking yet. And Mother, she says, Mama, I want some cookies and milk. And Mama says, go on out and play. Quit bothering me. 2 hours later, Mama's had 2 drinks. The little girl comes in, Mama gives her an icky kiss. An hour later, Mama has had 4 drinks, and Mama goes and finds the little girl and gives her more icky kisses and tells her, I'm going to buy you a 10-speed bike. Well, see, this little girl's starting to scratch her head. Like, what was the difference, she's saying to herself, when I walked in there at 3 o'clock, then what happened at 5 o'clock, then what happened at 6 o'clock? And she's trying to figure it out. And then by midnight, Mama's passed out. That's another mother. And then the next morning, when the little girl goes in and wants her 10-speed bike, Mother tells her to get out of there, quit thinking of yourself, quit being so selfish. So this kid's got 5 mothers. That's how we get set up in this thought disorder. And detailing and documenting and scorekeeping and obsessing is a thought disorder. And you're most prone to it when you're in this kind of pain. Anomie is the A anomie. Anomie means the feeling of being out of control. It's lawless. It's a sociological term. I'm trying to make these words match, folks. Anomie means, a more practical word is going berserk. So you start acting out. You become sexually promiscuous. Now, lots of people going through divorce will become, at least I've seen it, sexually promiscuous. In working with sexual addiction, sexual compulsivity, sometimes we really have to differentiate people who go through a transitional kind of sexual acting out and people who we would call card-carrying sex addicts. And I've seen a lot of people who think they're sex addicts who have basically gone through one of these kinds of transitions, where I wouldn't call them a sex addict. I would say they were acting out, see, again, as a way to avoid the pain, because the sex is a narcotic. And the sex also has it has a lot of narcissistic gratification in it. Somebody wants me. They're out of their gourd over me. They're all aroused over me. So sex lends itself to being a quick mood alterer. Now, there's a lot of damage in this kind of anomie. I know a guy that was a friend of mine in the East who was married, faithfully married for 20-something years. His wife died, and man, he went crazy. He started, acting out, and he was single, but he was a minister, really a good person, and just went into a period of promiscuity, and unfortunately did it with women in his parish. I mean, he was single, he was honest about, that he didn't want to get married, that he was just wanted a sexual relationship, but he was naive in the sense that he didn't realize that one of those ladies was going to talk to another lady, and pretty soon 7 or 8 of them got together, and he was defrocked. This was really a tragic kind of thing, because I guarantee you this guy was not a sex addict. He had been faithful in his marriage for 20-something years, but he just kind of went into the pain and the sadness and was using the sexual behavior, kind of making up for lost time, but also as a narcotic. Now, anomie can also be about eating, over drinking, over drugging, overworking. Whatever it is, it's getting out of control as a way to block the pain, to block the painful feelings. So I want to come back and underscore that, as I've been doing in this talk, that no pain, no gain. And that if we're not willing to do this work, you see, we do it at a great risk. I think it was John Powell, the Jesuit priest, who said, when you bury feelings, you bury them alive. The feelings don't die. And what we say in our center is you either work it out or you act it out. You see, the feeling goes somewhere, because remember, an emotion is energy in motion. You can't really deny a feeling. It's going to go somewhere. We stop feelings by shallow breathing, by muscle tension, by fantasizing abandonment, but the feelings are in our body. So if a person is mood altering with sex or drugs or food or an addiction or work or anything to distract them, what we call the activity addictions, the distractor addictions, it's going to catch up with you. Alice Miller once said, you can narcoticize your body, you can distract your brain, but one day your body will present its bill. That is, the feelings are in the body. They may present the bill with disease or sickness, what we call somatized feelings. See, sometimes people don't want to do these feelings and they get sick. It's a way to feel as bad as you really feel. and kind of legitimately be taken care of. The third thing in danger, these are the danger signs, is negotiating a quick new relationship. Negotiating a new relationship. I remember a guy in a 12-step group that I was in, and I remember we were sitting at a retreat, and he had just finished his second marriage. The divorce was all finished, and I never forget, I looked him right in the eye, and he said, I'll tell you, I'm not even going to look at a woman for at least 6 months. And I really think it'll be years before I get married again. So I said, Smitty, I think that's a real good idea. You've got some, you're not doing a good record. You're 24 now and you've been divorced twice. So I said, I think, maybe it's something for you to really think about. Yeah, man, I'm determined. He was married 2 weeks later. And of course that marriage ended in divorce. Because you see, it's using a relationship as a fix. I remember the most painful time in my own life being rejected by a gal. I'd come out of the seminary, I was dating, I'd really fallen in love with this person, and I don't know what all the deal was, but she just turned at a certain point, and that was it. I was history. And I'd never had that happen in my life. I'd never had anybody reject me like that. And the pain of it was just excruciating. And I remember Bernice, God bless her, is who I ran to out of this relationship. And Bernice was pretty needy herself and knew I was on the, lam, as it were. But it was just like going to get that other relationship to get out of the pain. To get out of the pain. Now, I'm telling you that that's probably one of the most damaging and dangerous things that anybody does, is going and negotiating a new relationship to get out of the pain. Because you see, what you're doing is you're setting the relationship up on the basis of neediness. You're not setting it up out of choice, out of having gone through. See, the end of grieving is to be born again. When you grieve, you die, and you go through all the emotion, and then finally the end of the grief process is to come to acceptance. And any of you have been through a grief, somebody's died. You know that when they die, you die in a sense. Everything looks dismal. I remember when my dad died. It was like I was going to give this talk, and I could have cared less. It all seemed so stupid. In the face of death, what does anything mean? And it's like you take it on, and everything seems banal and futile. But then you go through remorse, and then you go through anger, and then you go through sadness, and then you go through if only, and then you go through loneliness, and then finally one day you start feeling the life come back. See, the end of the process is like Freud called it a decathecting. It's like you literally are separating from that love object. And Freud called it grief work, that the psyche has to do a certain work. And when the work is done, life comes back, and you're born again, as it were. A whole new life comes back, and you start getting interested in things again. Any of you been through it, you know this is exactly what happens. So running and getting a relationship to fix you is not what will help you. Then the G is probably the most damaging of all, is the getting even. Getting even. And usually or often couples do this through children. And I think this is one of the most damaging and devastating aspects of divorce. Is the woman telling the kids, I didn't want the divorce, your father did it, or we wouldn't be getting a divorce if your father didn't run around on me, or the father telling the children, it was your mother's idea and she wouldn't give me another chance, or if your mother wasn't on pills, or if your mother wasn't an alcoholic, or trying to get the kid to like them better, or doing better deals for the kids. You know, daddy's got more money than mother, so he can take the kids on trips, so they'll think daddy's neater than mother. See, that's damaging to the children, and it's sort of a way to get even with the spouse and hurt the spouse. And I would say that nothing is more devastating to family life, to human beings, than this kind of stuff. And it's just, you know, what we've got to get across is the message that the children, it's painful for the children. Children want their mom and daddy. And they feel most their security with mom and dad there. Okay, the divorce is happening. Now, I have seen wonderful things happen out of divorce in the sense that the daddy had more quality time with the kids. I've seen it where the kid was carrying the parent's anger. Mother wouldn't express her anger, so the son's got all the anger. I'm working with a situation right now that as soon as they got the divorce, that boy's irrational anger toward his father just diminished because he didn't have to carry it for his mother anymore. If the parents will make the divorce between them and keep the kids out of it, let those kids have a life of their own. Tell them with your mouth, this is not your fault. You have nothing to do with this. This is about Daddy and I. This is about Mom and I. I want you to love your dad. I want you to love your mom. Don't talk about the other party to the children. And I see couples do that. They'll start bad-mouthing the other one to the children. And see, what happens is, from a family system point of view, the kids just get sucked into that. There's just nothing they can do about it. They're going to get sucked into it. And they'll often defend the parent who is the neediest, or the birth order positions will come out. See, in birth order, oldest kids tend to bond with father. That doesn't mean that they like the father more, but they'll take on the father issues more. Second kid will tend to bond with mother and tend to take on mother issues more. And so there's already stuff that just happened because the family is a social system that are hard enough on the kids. So getting even to the children is the gravest danger of divorce. Telling the kids it's not their fault. Really working hard not to say anything, to keep good boundaries with the kids. That this is between your father and I. This is between your mother and I. I don't want to talk to you about our relationship. See, in a healthy relationship in a family, parents ought to have 20% that the kids know nothing about. I mean, I like to give the example. If you think of a family, here's Norma and Jack. They get married. That's one family. Norma and Jack have Barbara. That's two families. Norma and Jack have Barbara and John. That's three families. Norma and Jack have Barbara, John, and Richard. That's four families. Barbara leaves home, so there's Norma, Jack, Richard, and John. That's five families. John leaves home, so there's Norma, Jack, and Richard. That's six families. Richard leaves home, so it's just Norma and Jack. That's seven families. Norma and Jack are going to live another 20 years together. What relationship should you work on? See, and that's why in my book and in the series, I said over and over again that the chief component in the family is the marriage. And marriages ought to be such that there's 20% of it the kids know nothing about. It's none of their business. Now, obviously, if couples are getting divorced, that didn't happen. So there's grave danger of the children being enmeshed into the marriage. The other way that couples get even is financially. Getting adversarial lawyers. We've got some lawyers in my hometown, Houston, that are just, they're just terrible. They want these divorces to go on and to get into adversarial stuff, and it's just the most damaging kind of thing I can think of. And couples who will do anything to deprive the other one of financial benefits. And, it's really a sad thing. I think of several cases that I've had where it's just, they spent hundreds and thousands of dollars to get even with each other. See, if you could just say, hey, it's over. Wave the flag of surrender. Be as amicable as you can. Work hard for an amicable settlement and end it. That's what a divorce is. So that is a real dangerous kind of thing. I could mention also, there's some other cases I have of one case where I worked with a mother and a father. It was clear to me that the woman had severe intimacy problems, that she had set her son up to be her surrogate husband, and then he had all this anger toward the father after the divorce, sued his father for supposedly stealing his money and his funds. I mean, just the most terrible thing that this father and son are in court in an adversarial relationship, and this mother's sitting there like Miss Saint, who basically set this up by not dealing with her own issues. Instead of owning her own intimacy dysfunction and doing something about it, she sets the son up in this adversarial relationship with the father, and she's the innocent one. See, and from a family system point of view, we see this often, frequently, and it's very tragic. The E, I'm just going to call this enacting violence, because one of the gravest dangers in this period is couples actually getting violent with each other. And I have seen cases. I worked with a guy where he went and tore the doors down in the house and threw bricks through the windows, and he was an offender, had been severely beaten as a kid himself, and often a child who is physically violated like that will become offender-oriented. But I've seen it both ways. I remember one woman who the guy started going out dating. This is after the divorce, and she would call every 7 minutes. She would call on the phone, and then she went over and smeared blood all over the girl's car that he was going out with. Another case I worked with where the woman would threaten suicide. She would lock herself in her apartment. This is after the divorce. And threatened if he went out, she would kill herself. And of course, he was buying into this. I mean, there he was, paralyzed, not going out on dates. I mean, you see, this is obviously not divorcing. This is obviously two people that are still connected to each other and are acting out a kind of violence toward each other. I mean, it probably doesn't need to be said that offender behavior, beating, sometimes this can be done through lawyers doing violence to the other person. But this stuff, in the long run, I've never seen a single case where anybody got anything out of this other than a lot of pain for themselves. And so it's just one of the most tragic things I know. The R is raging. I've seen couples that they can't talk to each other. And what I advise is that they stop talking to each other and only talk through their lawyers. Because sometimes that anger is so intense that the only thing to do is to get that divorce over with as legally and as quickly as you can. Now, I would add to the raging the refusal to end it, the refusal to forgive, the refusal to give up the resentments. Remember I said that so many divorces are a waste of time because the person doesn't do the grief work. I mean, if you're 10 years later and you're still holding on to resentments, that's like a cancer. It's like blood clots. A resentment is a recentere. It's a recycling of the feelings over and over again. It's like a classic metaphor of being stuck. You're stuck. You don't have any place to go. And you keep doing the same thing over and over again. See, what we want to do in surviving divorce is finish it and go on about your life. There's not a person divorcing right now that doesn't have all kinds of options and choices in their life. But you can't go on with your life if you're holding on to the past. See, forgive means to give as before. And when I say forgive, I mean that the grief process really is a forgiveness process. That's why grief needs to have anger in it. See, it's like Susan Farber and I were talking the other day, and she often says to people, don't forgive them, because what she means by that is that sort of maudlin, superficial, oh, I forgive you, and you did the best you could, but you really haven't, because you haven't done the grief work. And part of the grief work is anger. A lot of times people haven't really forgiven because they haven't done their anger work. Now, anger work is not raging. It's not holding on. It's expressing the anger and getting it over with. It's finishing the business. So that I'm not always staying and reenacting this drama for the rest of my life. Holding on to resentments, refusing to do the legitimate suffering. Like lots of times when I've worked with people and their resentments, what I've found is that there's a payoff in holding on to the resentment. Like I have a workshop I do called Resentment and Forgiveness. And one of the things that we do in this workshop is sort of have people write down all the things they resent and then own all the things that they resent about the person. Like if I say, well, you're so selfish, you never think of anyone but yourself, then I try that on. I say, I am very selfish, and see if it fits. And a lot of times, what I'll say to people is, you know, here's this guy you married at 19 and you still resent him. Why don't you turn your energy to Genghis Khan or Hitler? I mean, they're much more villainous than your ex-husband was. You know, and if you're going to put out all this energy, why don't you hate somebody that really deserves it? But because you see, the point of that is that there's a payoff in the hating. There's a payoff in the resentment. You know, the scriptures say, forgive or you won't be forgiven. That's a psychological truth. If I hold on to the resentment, I'm the one that gets hurt by it. It's like a blood clot in me. It's like I don't go beyond the resentment. I hold on to it. So the value in forgiveness is that I can get on with my life. I can give as before. I can get on with my life. And then the last thing is the S, dangers, shaming yourself, and then shaming your partner. I've got a guy right now that it's just awful. I mean, he'll go in front of the children and start crying and telling, you know, his wife how selfish she is and she doesn't need to do this and she's ruining the family. And he went out and did 6 weeks of treatment, and I went and did the treatment, and you're still getting this divorce. And he just goes on and on and on with the shaming. And you see, at this time, people don't need to be shamed. We don't need to be shaming ourselves. To remember what shame is. It's an attack on another person's being. It's saying you're flawed and defective as a person. Shame is different than guilt. Guilt is about doing. Shame is about being. And we need to heal. The whole point of surviving divorce is healing. That by being willing to embrace it, by being willing to do this work, as painful as it is, there's a healing that comes out of it. There's a new birth, a new life, new choices. And there's, you know, we could have hundreds of witnesses come on and witness to the fact that they didn't think they could get through it, that it was the most terrible time, that it got worse before it got better, and now their life is wonderful. I'm thinking of a woman who has 3 lovers. One is an Italian duke, and she's got a villa in Italy, and when that gal was married, it was pretty bad. And I remember going through the divorce with her, how painful it was. And so, I mean, there really is life after divorce. And we really have to get that message out to people. These are some of the terrible dangers of it. The thing that I'd like to, conclude this with is just that what we've been talking about in surviving divorce is legitimate suffering. And I want to tell you, folks, I don't know why human life is like this. That it seems to be that probably the most important things we learn in our life come out of our suffering. I can tell you that's true for me. December 11, 1965, they carried me into Austin State Hospital on a stretcher. It was the tail end of 17 years of alcoholism. That is the worst thing that ever happened to me, and it is the best thing that ever happened to me. My life changed radically from that point on, and was terrible. So I don't know why that what hurts instructs. Without a hurt, a heart is hollow. But every wise man from Buddha on, Buddha's first noble truth was that if you're in human form, there's going to be suffering. Jesus talked about there's no resurrection without crucifixion. The Jewish scriptures tell us about you can't get to the promised land unless you go through Egypt. So whatever else we're going to say, I would have saved the world with golf and tennis myself, had I had a shot at it. But that doesn't seem to be the way that it was. So the embracing of the legitimate suffering, the poet says, what a strange thing is pleasure and pain. Your pleasure was once your pain. The self-same well from which your laughter rises was once filled with tears. Is not the cup that holds your wine the very cup that was burned in the potter's oven? Is not the lute that plays your music the very lute that was whittled with knives? See, what a strange thing is pleasure and pain. The deeper that sorrow carves in your being, the more joy you can contain. So that isn't an answer to it, and if you're in the midst of the suffering, it's not going to take it away, but I hope it can give you hope. My favorite quotation in the whole world is one from Leon Blois, a French novelist, and I'm going to leave you with this. Leon Blois once said, there are places in the heart that do not yet exist. Pain must be in order that they be. See, and so that's the point of surviving the divorce, that you'll have a greater compassion. There's a greater humanness that comes out of that deep suffering and commitment and being true to